The stars burned cold in the void of space as Commander Zrak stood on the bridge of his warship and watched the planet below with calculating eyes. His orders were simple, and he had followed them 1,000 times before. Survey the planet, extract valuable resources, eliminate any resistance. The Valorian Empire did not ask permission, and they certainly did not expect primitive worlds to challenge their authority. The planet was beautiful in a wild, untamed way with vast forests that stretched across continents and mountains that pierced the clouds like ancient guardians. The scans showed no advanced technology and no military installations. Just another backwards world ripe for exploitation. Zrax felt nothing as he gave the order to begin landing operations. The first transport ships descended through the atmosphere and their engines roared like thunder across the quiet valleys below. Soldiers in heavy armor emerged from the landing craft and began setting up mining equipment without bothering to check if anyone lived in the forests they were preparing to destroy. They had done this too many times to waste effort on unnecessary caution, but someone was watching. Deep in the heart of the ancient forest, Luna Martinez sat cross-legged on a moss-covered rock and felt the disturbance in the air long before the ships arrived. Her long, dark hair moved slightly in the breeze, and her eyes reflected something far older than her young appearance suggested. Beside her, 2 dragons lay curled in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the massive trees above. Ember was the color of molten gold, and flames danced along her scales even in rest. Frost was pale blue like winter ice, and the air around him shimmered with cold that never touched Luna. "They are here," Ember said without speaking, and her voice resonated in Luna's mind like distant bells. "Should we hide?" Frost asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Luna stood and placed her hands gently on both dragons and felt their ancient power thrumming beneath their scales. "We tried hiding before," she said quietly. "It never works. They always come back with more ships and more weapons. No, this time we meet them." The dragons rose to their full height, and even though they were not yet fully grown, they towered over Luna like living monuments to a time when magic and reality were the same thing. They had been with her since she was a child, when she found their eggs abandoned in a cave and brought them home against all common sense. Now they were bonded in ways that went deeper than blood or species. Where she went, they followed, and together they were something the galaxy had never seen before. Luna walked through the forest toward the landing. Sight and her dragons moved beside her with a grace that seemed impossible for creatures so large. Animals scattered at their approach, but birds sang above as if celebrating their passing. The forest itself seemed to bend toward them, and ancient trees whispered secrets in languages long forgotten by civilized worlds. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Luna stopped and observed the Valorian soldiers from the shadows. They moved with military precision and set up their equipment with practiced efficiency. They wore armor that could withstand plasma fire and carried weapons designed to level cities. They looked invincible. Luna stepped into the clearing. The soldiers saw her immediately, and their weapons came up in synchronized movements that spoke of countless battles. They saw a young woman in simple clothes with 2 massive reptilian creatures at her side, and their targeting systems locked onto all 3 targets within microseconds. The commander of the ground force stepped forward and activated his translator unit. "You will surrender immediately," he announced in a voice amplified to carry across the clearing. "This planet is now property of the Valorian Empire. Resistance will result in immediate termination." Luna tilted her head and studied the commander like he was a particularly interesting insect. She had learned their language months ago, when the first scout ships appeared in orbit. She had listened to their communications and learned everything about them while they learned nothing about her. Now she spoke in perfect Valorian without any translator. "This planet belongs to no empire," she said calmly. "You should leave while you still can." The soldiers laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. The commander raised his weapon, and Luna saw his finger tighten on the trigger. She did not move. She did not need to. Ember and Frost moved faster than anything that size should be able to move, and suddenly they were between Luna and the soldiers, with their massive bodies forming an impenetrable shield. The plasma bolts hit dragon scales and dissipated like raindrops on stone. The soldiers fired again and again, and the clearing lit up with weapons fire that should have killed anything living. But the dragons just stood there and absorbed every shot without flinching. When the weapons finally ran dry and the soldiers stood in shocked silence, Luna stepped around Ember and looked at the commander. She felt pity for him, which was strange considering he had just tried to kill her. He was just following orders. He probably had a family somewhere. He definitely had no idea what he was dealing with. "I do not want to hurt you," Luna said, and her voice carried a weight that made even the hardened soldiers take a step back. "But I will protect my home. You have one chance to return to your ship and leave this system. Take it." The commander was trapped between pride and survival instinct. His armor's sensors were screaming warnings about the energy readings coming from the dragons. His training said to fight. His instincts said to run. Before he could decide, the choice was taken from him. A bright beam of light shot down from orbit and struck the clearing with enough force to vaporize everything in a 100-meter radius. It was an orbital strike weapon designed to eliminate ground targets when conventional forces failed. Commander Zrax had been watching from orbit and decided to solve the problem with overwhelming firepower. But when the light faded and the smoke cleared, Luna stood exactly where she had been with her dragons. Wings spread above her like a canopy, and the ground beneath them completely untouched. Frost had created a shield of ice that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and Ember had generated heat intense enough to counteract the beam's energy. Together they had protected their bonded human without effort. Luna looked up at the sky, and even though she could not see the warship in orbit, she knew Zrax was watching. She raised one hand and pointed directly at where she knew his ship was positioned. Her message was clear. "Come down here yourself. Face me." On the bridge of his warship, Zrax felt something he had not experienced in decades of military service. Fear. Not of dying in battle, which he had accepted long ago, but fear of something unknown, something that all his weapons and armor and training had not prepared him for. He gave the order to withdraw ground forces and prepare for capture operations. If weapons would not work, then they would use containment fields and stasis technology. They would study this human and her creatures. They would learn her weaknesses. Then they would add her power to the Empire. Luna watched the soldiers retreat to their ships and felt the weight of what was coming. They would not give up. Empires never did, and she could not keep fighting forever. Eventually she would make a mistake, or the dragons would tire, or someone innocent would get caught in the crossfire. So when the capture ships descended with their energy nets and stasis beams, Luna made a decision that would change the galaxy. She told Ember and Frost to stand down. She walked forward and let the containment field wrap around her. She allowed herself to be taken, because sometimes the only way to win was to let your enemy think they had already won. The containment cell was designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the known galaxy, and Luna Martinez sat in its center like she was waiting for tea. The walls were made of energy fields layered so thick that not even light could escape without permission. Sensors monitored every breath and every heartbeat. Guards stood outside with weapons that could punch through starship hulls, and yet Luna looked completely calm. Ember and Frost were in separate cells designed specifically for them, after the Valorian scientists spent hours studying their biology and getting absolutely nowhere. The dragons were too complex and too ancient for modern science to understand. Their cells were reinforced with every type of shielding the Empire possessed and pumped full of sedatives, strong enough to drop a mountain. The dragons ignored the drugs completely and watched their captors with eyes that promised consequences. Commander Zrax stood in the observation room and studied his prisoners through multiple camera feeds. He had won. The human was captured. The creatures were contained. His mission was complete. So why did he feel like he had just made the worst mistake of his career? "Bring the human to interrogation room 7, he ordered, and his voice sounded uncertain, even to himself. "I want to understand what she is." 2 guards entered the containment cell and deactivated the inner field just enough to allow passage. They approached Luna with weapons drawn and expected resistance. Instead, she stood up gracefully and smiled at them like they were old friends. "Your commander wants to talk," she said. "I know. Let us not keep him waiting." The guards exchanged nervous glances. Prisoners were not supposed to be this cooperative. They were supposed to fight or beg or at least show some sign of fear. Luna did none of those things. She walked between them with perfect posture and seemed more like a guest than a captive. The interrogation room was cold and sterile with a single table and 2 chairs. Zrax sat in one and gestured for Luna to take the other. She sat down and folded her hands on the table and waited. The commander had interrogated thousands of prisoners, but none had ever looked at him the way this human did. Like she was the one asking questions. "What are you?" Zrax demanded. His translator converted his words to what it thought was the human's language, but Luna answered in flawless Valorian again. I am what your people used to be before you forgot, she said. Before empires and conquest and the belief that strength comes from domination, I am someone who remembers that power means nothing without purpose. Zrax slammed his hand on the table, and the metal dented under the force of his armored glove. Do not speak in riddles, he growled. You are a prisoner. You have no leverage. Tell me what I want to know, or your creatures will suffer. Luna's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air, and suddenly, the room felt much colder. Zrax realized his mistake immediately. Threatening the dragons had been the wrong move. You will not harm them, Luna said, and her voice carried absolute certainty. Not because I will stop you, though I could, but because you are not cruel. You are a soldier following orders. There is a difference. Zrax sat back and studied the human with new eyes. She had just been captured by an empire that controlled 1,000 worlds. She was locked in a ship surrounded by enemies. Her companions were in cells designed to hold living weapons, and yet she spoke to him like an equal. No, like someone with all the power in the room. Why did you surrender, he asked, and this time his voice was genuinely curious. You could have escaped. Your creatures are powerful enough to destroy this entire ship. Why allow yourself to be captured? Luna leaned forward slightly and her eyes locked onto his. Because I wanted to meet you, Commander Zrax. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who would destroy my home without knowing what lived there. I wanted to understand how someone becomes so lost that they forget the value of life. The words hit harder than any weapon. Zrax had never thought about the planets he had conquered, or the civilizations he had helped destroy. They were just missions, just orders from command, just numbers in reports filed and forgotten. But sitting across from this strange human who looked at him like she could see every choice he had ever made, suddenly those numbers felt like weight on his soul. I am a soldier, he said defensively. I follow orders. The Empire decides what worlds are valuable. I simply carry out policy. And if the Empire ordered you to destroy a world with children, would you do it? Luna asked. If command told you to eliminate an entire species because they refused to submit, would you consider that just following orders? Zrax had no answer. He had followed such orders before, though he never let himself think about it in those terms. Acceptable casualties, strategic necessities, primitive cultures that could not adapt. All the phrases that made atrocities sound reasonable. Before he could respond, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Zrax's communication unit crackled to life and his chief engineer's panicked voice came through. Commander, we have a critical problem. The power core is destabilizing. Something is wrong with the containment matrix. Zrax was on his feet instantly. What happened? He demanded. We just performed maintenance yesterday. The core was stable. It was stable, sir, the engineer replied. But the energy readings from the dragon specimens are interfering with our systems. They are generating some kind of field we cannot measure, and it is causing cascade failures throughout the ship. We have maybe 5 minutes before the core goes critical. Luna stood up and the guards immediately pointed weapons at her. She ignored them and looked directly at Zrax. You studied my companions without understanding what they are, she said calmly. Dragon fire and dragon ice exist outside normal physics. They operate on principles your science cannot detect. By trying to contain them, you have poisoned your own ship. Can you stop it? Zrax asked, and pride and protocol were forgotten in the face of losing his entire crew. I can, Luna said. But first you must make a choice. You can die here with your ship and your orders and your empire's policies. Or you can trust me and maybe we all survive. Choose quickly, Commander. You have 4 minutes. Zrax looked at the human woman and saw something in her eyes that made his decision. It was not pity or superiority or triumph. It was genuine concern. This prisoner who he had captured and threatened was worried about him and his crew. She had no reason to help them. Every reason to let them die. And yet she offered salvation anyway. Free her companions, he ordered. Full access to all containment systems. Do it now. Sir, that violates every protocol, the head of security protested. Do it or we all die, Zrax snapped. Sometimes protocols are less important than survival. T-Way. Containment fields around Ember and Frost deactivated, and the dragons emerged from their cells with expressions that suggested they had been waiting patiently for the foolish mortals to realize their mistake. They moved through the ship's corridors and met Luna in the interrogation room. She touched both of them gently and felt their power stabilize. We need to reach the core chamber, Luna told Zrax. And we need to do it in 3 minutes. Can your ship move that fast? Rax activated his command override and opened every security door between the interrogation room and engineering. Follow me, he said, and started running. Luna and her dragons followed, and behind them the ship began tearing itself apart as the power core's containment finally failed. Time was running out, and everyone aboard knew that survival depended on a human prisoner and her impossible companions. The galaxy was about to witness something it had never seen before. The moment when an empire's commander learned that some things were more important than conquest. The corridors of the Valorian warship shook and twisted as Commander Zrax ran through them with Luna Martinez and her dragons close behind. Emergency lights flashed red, and the automated voice warning system counted down the seconds until core breach in a tone that was far too calm for what it was announcing. Crew members fled toward escape pods, and some stopped to stare, in shock at their commander running alongside the prisoner he had captured. Just hours before, 2 minutes 30 seconds until core breach, the ship announced. All personnel evacuate immediately. The engineering deck was chaos when they arrived. Technicians scrambled to override failing systems while others grabbed essential equipment and ran for the exits. The head engineer saw Zrax and rushed over with a datapad, showing readings that made no sense. The containment matrix is completely gone, sir, he said. The antimatter is exposed. Nothing can stop it now. Luna pushed past them and walked directly toward the massive doors that led to the core chamber. She did not ask permission, and she did not slow down when the guards moved to stop her. Ember and Frost walked on either side of their bonded human, and the guards took one look at the dragons and decided that protocol could wait. You cannot go in there, Zrax shouted over the noise of alarms. The radiation alone will kill you in seconds. Luna looked back at him and smiled that same calm smile that had unnerved him since the moment they met. Commander, she said, you are thinking like someone who believes death is the worst thing that can happen. I stopped believing that a long time ago. She placed her hands on the door, and it should not have opened without proper authorization, codes and biometric scans, but the metal simply melted away like it was greeting an old friend. Beyond was a sight that would haunt Zrax for the rest of his life. The power core floated in the center of a massive chamber, and it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Energy arced across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The antimatter at its heart pulsed with barely contained fury, and everything was bathed in radiation levels that would kill an unprotected person before they could take 3 steps. Luna walked in. Anyway, Ember and Frost followed, and as they entered the chamber, they began to change. Ember's scales ignited with flames that burned hotter than the core of a star but produced no heat. Frost exhaled and ice crystals formed in the air despite the intense radiation. The dragons grew larger until they filled half the chamber, and their power resonated with frequencies that existing instruments could not measure. 1 minute until core breach, the ship announced, and several engineers simply gave up and ran for the escape pods. Zrax stayed because he had to see this. He had to know if the human who surrendered without a fight could actually save them all, or if this was simply a different way to die. He activated his armor's maximum radiation, shielding knowing it would buy him maybe 30 seconds, and watched through the observation window as Luna approached the dying star at the heart of his ship. She did not speak, and she did not use any tools or technology. She simply raised both hands and closed her eyes. Ember moved to her right and Frost to her left, and together they formed a triangle around the core. Then they began to sing. It was not a sound that vocal cords should be able to make. It resonated through the ship's hull and into the bones of every person still aboard. It was the sound of ice forming on mountain peaks and fire burning in the hearts of suns. It was the sound of life itself choosing to continue against all odds. And somehow impossibly the core responded. The violent energy arcs began to slow and smooth into graceful spirals. The antimatter that had been seconds from explosion started to pulse in rhythm with the dragon song. Temperature readings that had been climbing toward infinity suddenly stabilized and began dropping to safe levels. The containment matrix that had completely failed reassembled, itself molecule by molecule, as if time was running backwards. 30 seconds until core breached, the ship said, but its voice now sounded uncertain. The engineers stared at their instruments in disbelief, as every system that had been cascading toward failure reversed course. Power levels stabilized. Radiation dropped to normal background levels. The core that had been about to vaporize the entire ship now hummed contentedly, like it had never been in danger at all. Core breach canceled, the ship announced, and sounded almost disappointed. All systems nominal. Threat level 0. Luna opened her eyes and lowered her hands. Ember and Frost stopped singing and shrank back to their normal size. The three of them stood in the center of the chamber surrounded by a power core that now worked better than it had when first installed. Then Luna turned and walked back out like she had just finished a simple repair job. Zrax met her at the door and could not find words for what he had just witnessed. His armor's sensors had recorded everything, but he knew no one would believe the readings. A human woman and 2 dragons had reached into the heart of an antimatter core with their bare hands and convinced it not to explode. That was not science. That was not technology. That was something else entirely. How Luna asked before he could form a question. Because we asked nicely. Because Ember understands fire in ways your scientists never will. Because Frost knows that even antimatter is just frozen energy that wants to be something else. Because I have spent my whole life learning that everything is alive if you know how to listen. The crew began returning to their stations, and they looked at Luna with expressions that mixed fear with something closer to worship. She had saved them all. The prisoner had rescued her captors, and none of them would ever forget the human who walked into certain death and came out victorious. Zrax removed his helmet and looked at Luna with new understanding. You could have let us die, he said quietly. You could have escaped while we were distracted. Why save us after everything we did to you? Luna tilted her head and considered the question like it was genuinely puzzling to her. Because you are alive, she said simply. Because every person on this ship has family and friends and dreams. Because Commander Zrax wears his guilt like armor and believes following orders absolves him of responsibility. Because maybe if I save you today, you will think twice before destroying someone else's home tomorrow. The words hit harder than any accusation. Zrax had told himself for years that he was just a soldier. Just following orders. Just doing his duty. But standing in front of this impossible human who had every reason to hate him and chose compassion instead, he could not hide behind those excuses anymore. The escape pods are returning, a junior officer reported. All crew accounted for. 0 casualties. Release the prisoners Zrax ordered, and his command staff looked at him like he had gone insane. Remove all restraints. Return her and her companions to their planet. We are leaving this system immediately. Sir, the security chief protested. Command will demand an explanation. They sent us here to harvest resources. If we return empty-handed, there will be consequences. Then I will face those consequences, Zrax said, and his voice carried an authority that silenced all objections. I will not strip mine a world inhabited by beings who can heal antimatter cores with their bare hands. I will not make an enemy of someone who saved my crew when she had every reason to let us die. And I will not follow orders that I now understand are fundamentally wrong. Luna smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Zrax had seen from her. It transformed her face from merely pretty to something luminous. You are learning, Commander, she said. That is good. The galaxy needs more people who question orders instead of blindly following them. Come, Luna said to her dragons. Let us go home. We have much to tell the forest. Ember and Frost moved to flank her, and together they walked toward the hangar bay where a shuttle waited to return them to the planet below. Every crew member they passed stopped and stepped aside, not out of fear but out of respect. They had all seen the footage. They all knew what she had done, and they would all carry this story with them for the rest of their lives. Zrax watched them go and felt something shift inside his chest. He had conquered 100 worlds and never questioned if it was right. Now he would spend however long remained questioning everything. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere, and Luna watched her planet grow larger in the viewport. From orbit it looked peaceful and unchanged, but she could feel the scars left by the Valorian mining equipment. The forest whispered to her even across the distance between ground and sky, and told her of trees that had been marked for destruction and streams that had been analyzed for mineral content. The Empire had been here for less than a day, but already they had begun the process of cataloging everything for eventual exploitation. Commander, Zrax piloted the shuttle himself and refused to let any of his crew accompany them. This was something he needed to do alone. Luna sat behind him with Ember and Frost curled at her feet and wondered if he truly understood what he had started. Defying direct orders from the Valorian Empire was not something commanders survived. The moment his superiors learned he had released a valuable prisoner and abandoned a resource-rich planet, questions would be asked, investigations would be opened, and Zrax would likely face a court-martial that could end his career or worse. "Why are you doing this?" Luna asked as the shuttle broke through the clouds. "You could have kept us prisoner. Told your empire that you needed more time to study us. Bought yourself time to figure out a story that would protect you." Drax was quiet for a long moment and his hands steady on the controls. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that suggested he had been asking himself the same question. "Because I looked into the core chamber and saw you save people who had imprisoned you," he said. "Because I have spent 30 years following orders without question and suddenly I cannot remember why any of it mattered. Because maybe it is time I faced consequences for choices I actually made instead of hiding behind duty." The shuttle landed in the same clearing where Luna had first confronted the Valorian forces, and the contrast was striking. Where there had been military precision and threatening weapons, now there was just one ship and one commander who looked lost. Drax opened the hatch and Luna stepped out onto soil that sang with relief at her return. Ember and Frost launched into the air and flew circles around the clearing, breathing fire and ice in patterns that looked like celebration. The forest had gathered to meet them. Not just trees, but the animals who called it home. Deer that should have been hiding watched from the tree line. Birds that should have fled sang overhead. Even the wind seemed to move with intention as it rustled through branches and carried the scent of growing things. Luna stood in the center of it all and felt the planet welcome her back. Drax descended the shuttle ramp and stopped at the edge of the clearing. He had conquered worlds, but standing here surrounded by nature that clearly recognized and loved Luna, he felt like an intruder. Like he was standing in a sacred place without permission. He should leave. He should return to his ship and let the human disappear back into her forest. But he could not move. "What will you do now?" Luna asked, and she was looking at him with those two knowing eyes again. "When you return to your empire and tell them you failed?" "I will tell them the truth," Drax said. "That this planet is inhabited by beings far more advanced than we assumed. That attempting to harvest resources here would result in casualties we cannot afford. That the strategic value of this world does not justify the cost of taking it. And if they do not believe you," Luna asked. "Then I will face the consequences," Drax replied. "I have made my choice. For the first time in my career, I am choosing what I believe is right over what I have been ordered to do. Whatever happens next, I can live with that." Luna studied him for another moment, then nodded slowly. "You are braver than you think, Commander. Most people who have followed orders their entire lives cannot suddenly stop even when they know those orders are wrong. You are choosing a harder path, and that takes more courage than any battle." She walked toward him, and Drax had to resist the urge to step back. Luna stopped just in front of him and reached out to place one hand on his armored chest directly over his heart. She closed her eyes, and Drax felt warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with temperature. It was like being seen completely and accepted anyway. Like every mistake and every doubt and every moment of guilt he carried was acknowledged and somehow forgiven. "You carry a heavy burden," Luna said softly. "All those worlds, all those orders, all those times you told yourself it was necessary. You do not have to carry that alone anymore, Commander. The first step to change is recognizing what needs to change. You have taken that step. Do not waste it." She removed her hand and stepped back. Drax felt the loss of that warmth like a physical thing. He wanted to ask what she had done, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just nodded and turned back toward the shuttle. He made it 3 steps before Luna's voice stopped him. "Commander, wait." Drax turned and saw Luna walking toward him with something in her hands. It was a small piece of crystal that caught the light and reflected it in patterns that should not be possible. She held it out to him, and he took it automatically. The crystal was warm and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. "What is this?" Drax asked. "A reminder," Luna said. "When you face your empire and they demand answers. When they tell you that mercy is weakness and compassion is foolish. When they try to convince you that what you did here was wrong. Look at that crystal and remember what you saw in the core chamber. Remember that some things are more important than empires and orders and conquest. Remember that you chose to be better." Drax closed his fist around the crystal and felt its warmth spread through his palm. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt inadequate for what she had given him, but they were all he had. "Go now," Luna said with a gentle smile. "Your crew is waiting. Your empire is waiting. And the choice you made here today will ripple further than you can imagine. Be ready for that." Drax returned to the shuttle, and as he lifted off, he watched Luna and her dragons grow smaller in the viewport until they disappeared back into the forest. The clearing was empty again, like no one had ever been there. But Drax knew better. He had been changed by what happened on this planet, and there was no going back to who he had been before. The flight back to his warship was quiet, and Zrax spent it looking at the crystal Luna had given him. It continued to pulse with that strange internal light, and every time he looked at it, he remembered her walking into the core chamber without fear. He remembered her saving people who had threatened her. He remembered her looking at him like he was worth saving too. When he docked with the warship, his second-in-command was waiting with a worried expression. "Sir," he said, "Command has been trying to reach you for the past hour. They are demanding a full report on the prisoner status and resource assessment." "Tell them the prisoner has been released," Zrax said calmly. "Tell them this planet is inhabited by an advanced species with capabilities that exceed our current understanding. Tell them I am recommending this system be designated as restricted space with no military or commercial access permitted." His second-in-command stared at him like he had started speaking an alien language. "Sir, that is not going to satisfy Command. They will demand you return for the prisoner. They will send more ships. Then they will learn the same lesson I did," Zrax said, "that some battles are not worth fighting. Some victories are actually defeats. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away." He went to his quarters and placed the crystal on his desk where he could see it. Then he sat down and began writing his report. He knew it would likely be his last one as a commander. He knew his career was effectively over. He knew the Empire would not forgive this choice. But as he wrote and felt the crystal's warmth from across the room, Zrax found he did not care about any of that. For the first time in 30 years, he was making decisions based on what was right instead of what was ordered, and that felt more like freedom than anything Command had ever given him. The Valorian High Command received Zrax's report 3 days later, and the response was exactly what he expected: immediate recall to the capital world, suspension of command pending investigation, formal charges of insubordination and violation of direct orders. His second-in-command read the orders aloud on the bridge, and every crew member heard the career of their commander being systematically destroyed. But something strange happened. Instead of relief or schadenfreude, or the quiet satisfaction that often came when a superior officer fell from grace, the crew responded with anger. The head engineer who had watched Luna save the core spoke first. "This is wrong," he said, and his voice carried across the bridge. "Commander Zrax made the right call. That human saved all of us. We would be dead if he had not trusted her." The security chief, who had initially protested Luna's release, nodded. "I have served in this fleet for 15 years, and I have never seen a commander put crew safety above career advancement. Zrax did that, and now Command wants to punish him for not getting us all killed." One by one, the bridge crew voiced their support, and soon it spread throughout the entire ship. What started as quiet conversations in the mess hall became heated debates in every corridor. The crew had seen the footage of Luna walking into the core chamber. They had felt the ship dying around them. They knew without question that their commander's choice to trust the prisoner had saved their lives. And they were not about to let him face court-martial alone, Sir, the communications officer said hesitantly. "We are receiving messages from other ships in the fleet. Word has spread about what happened here. Other commanders are asking questions. Some are saying they would have made the same choice." Zrax sat in his command chair and felt something shift in the air around him. He had expected to face consequences alone. He had accepted that his career was over and prepared himself for whatever punishment Command deemed appropriate. But he had not expected his crew to stand with him, and he certainly had not expected his decision to resonate beyond his own ship. The crystal Luna had given him sat in his pocket, and he touched it unconsciously. It pulsed warmth against his palm like a heartbeat, and somehow he knew she was aware of what was happening. Somehow across the distance between her forest and his ship, she was watching and waiting to see what choice humanity would make. The journey back to the capital world took 2 weeks, and during that time something unprecedented happened. The footage of Luna saving the core leaked onto the galactic network, and it spread like wildfire across every species and every world connected to the Valorian Empire. Within days, billions of beings had watched the human woman walk into lethal radiation and heal a dying star with nothing but her dragons and her will. They watched her save the people who had imprisoned her. They watched her show mercy when vengeance would have been justified. And the galaxy had questions. Who were these humans that they could touch antimatter without dying? What kind of species chose to save their enemies? Why had the Empire tried to conquer a world inhabited by beings with such power? And most importantly, what other lies had they been told about primitive worlds and necessary conquest? By the time Zrax's ship reached the capital, the political landscape had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. Protests erupted on a dozen worlds. Scientists demanded access to study the human and her dragons. Religious leaders declared Luna a sign from higher powers, and several member species began questioning whether they wanted to remain part of an empire that destroyed first and asked questions never. Zrax was summoned before the High Council the day after his arrival, and he walked into that chamber knowing his fate was already decided. The council members sat in elevated seats that forced anyone before them to look up. It was designed to intimidate, and it had worked on countless officers over the centuries. But Zrax had looked into the heart of a dying star. He had stood beside a human who healed impossible things. A room full of politicians no longer impressed him. Commander Zrax, one of the council members, began, "You are charged with insubordination, violation of direct orders, and releasing a valuable prisoner without authorization. How do you plead?" "Guilty on all counts," Zrax said, and his voice was steady. "I violated orders. I released the prisoner, and I would do it again without hesitation because following those orders would have killed my entire crew. Sometimes duty to your people is more important than duty to command." The council murmured among themselves, and Zrax could see they had not expected him to admit guilt so readily. They had prepared for excuses and justifications. His simple honesty had thrown them off balance. Another council member leaned forward. "You realize your actions have created significant political complications. The footage of the human has spread across the network. Member worlds are questioning our resource acquisition policies. Some are even threatening to leave the Empire. Your single act of mercy has destabilized everything we have built." "Then perhaps what we built was not as stable as we believed," Zrax replied. "Perhaps an empire that requires lies and conquest to survive deserves to be questioned. I saw what that human could do. I felt her power, and I understood that we have been destroying worlds inhabited by beings we cannot comprehend because it was easier than admitting we might not be the strongest force in the galaxy." The council chambers erupted in argument, and Zrax stood silent in the center of it all. Some council members called for immediate execution. Others demanded he be stripped of rank and imprisoned. A few surprisingly called for leniency, citing the unprecedented circumstances. The debate raged for hours, and through it all Zrax remained calm and centered and aware of the crystal in his pocket, pulsing its steady warmth. Finally, the head of the council called for silence. "Commander Zrax," he said heavily, "this council has never faced a situation like this before. Your actions saved your crew, but violated fundamental military principles. The human you released possesses power we do not understand and may pose a threat we cannot assess. We cannot simply ignore what you have done." He paused and looked at Zrax with something that might have been respect. "However, we also cannot ignore that you are not standing here alone. Your entire crew has filed formal statements supporting your decision. 17 other ship commanders have submitted requests to study your report, and the galactic community is demanding answers about our policies. This is bigger than one act of insubordination." "So what is your judgment?" Zrax asked. The council head stood and the chamber fell silent. "Commander Zrax, you are hereby stripped of your military rank and command. However, instead of imprisonment, you are being appointed as our first official ambassador of First Contact. Your mission is to return to the humans' world and establish formal diplomatic relations, learn about her species, understand their capabilities, and help us create policies that prevent future conflicts with beings we do not understand." Zrax felt the weight of 30 years of military service lift from his shoulders and be replaced with something lighter and somehow more meaningful. "An ambassador," he said. "You want me to return to Luna? We want you to help us avoid another war we cannot win," the council head said bluntly. "That human saved your crew with a thought. If there are more like her, we need to know. And we need someone who has already earned her trust. You are uniquely qualified for this role, Commander, or should I say, Ambassador Zrax." The council dismissed him, and Zrax walked out of the chambers feeling like he had just been given a second chance at a life he thought was over. His crew was waiting outside, and they erupted in cheers when they saw him. The head engineer clapped him on the back. "They could not execute you," he said, grinning. "Not without making you a martyr. This is better anyway. You get to see that human again." Zrax touched the crystal in his pocket and felt it pulse stronger as if responding to his thoughts. "Yes," he said quietly. "I get to return to Luna and learn what else I do not know about the universe." Back on her forest planet, Luna sat beside a stream with Ember and Frost and watched the stars. She felt Zrax's relief and determination across the distance and smiled. The commander had passed his first test. Now came the harder part, helping an empire learn that strength came from connection, not conquest. It would take time and patience and many more conversations, but she had time. The forest had time, and the dragons who had watched empires rise and fall across millennia assured her that this empire was finally ready to listen. The galaxy was watching and learning, and for the first time in centuries, it was asking the right questions. What did it mean to be strong? What did it cost to be an empire? And were there better ways to exist among the stars than conquest and submission? Luna did not have all the answers, but she knew someone who was finally ready to ask the questions. Commander Zrax would return, and when he did, the real work would begin.